Welcome to the Higher Love with Megan podcast with me, your host, Megan Cooper, a holistic coach and trauma-informed practitioner. This podcast seeks to break out of the echo chamber of societal narratives that perpetuate our institutions and challenge the status quo of wellness and beyond. Join me as we decolonize our minds, address and use our privilege, and prioritize inclusivity. Here, diverse experiences are honoured, and together we are fostering a space that stands for higher love for all. As a listener, you are not just here to passively consume. You're an ambassador for deep healing and societal evolutions, ready to engage in thought-provoking, challenging conversations. As your host, I'm committed to providing ever-expansive spaces that inspire us to contribute to a world defined by higher love. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Up on the podcast this week, we have Alex Sesto. I followed Alex on Instagram over the past year and reached out to him a while ago to guest on an episode. One of those knowing I want to collaborate with this person for a conversation, but not knowing fully what that topic is. The episode revealed itself recently when Alex shared a post on Instagram that I really resonated with. I'll share the post here for context of the episode. Alex writes, "Over the years, I have been fortunate enough to be exposed to Indigenous wisdom from a variety of cultures. I often feel that the knowledge I come across speaks to an ancient part of my psyche. There is a deep remembering that these tribes are a continuation of a thread that leads back to the way that life once was for my ancestors. The magical connection to nature, the strength of community, the honouring of the elders and ancestors. I feel the grief at what's been lost and forgotten here in the West, and what civilization is doing to these precious cultures via the broken collective vision of progress over everything. There was once a time we could drink fresh water from the rivers and the streams. How much progress have we made if this is almost impossible now? There was once a time when we realized that the earth is our mother. How strong can we collectively grow if this relationship is severed? There was once a time we understood the significance of fire, water, earth, minerals and nature. How much do we truly know if this is forgotten? Return to nature exists to help integrate ancient wisdom into the modern psyche so that the new collective vision for our descendants is one of harmony, connection and a deep knowledge of who we really are." I hope that you enjoy this episode. Welcoming Alex. Really great to connect with you, Alex, for this conversation on this Monday afternoon. Thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Really look forward to having this conversation. It feels like it's been a while in the making.
So yes, on the back of the post that you shared a few weeks ago, which we'll go into, it really felt like this was an episode that was important and interesting to me personally, as well as for my listeners. And just for some context about who you are, what you do, maybe I'll let you introduce yourself in your own words to kick us off.
My name's Alex Sesto. I'm a father, a movement practitioner. I'm also a husband as well. I also run retreats called Return to Nature, are aimed to get people to connect to the natural world and through the natural world reconnect to themselves, the deeper essence of who they are without all the baggage we pick up along the journey of life. I also facilitate group events that are multifaceted, taking people through different practices like breathwork, sound, cold and hot exposure, so sauna and ice baths. I also do work in building community with a company called Vivo Barefoot to create and curate events for them that speak to their brand philosophies and values. So lots of things in the wellness space, lots of work around reconnecting people through simple practices that are powerful and potent. It's been inspiring for my own journey to connect to those practices, but also to be able to create spaces for other people to and see people go through the process of coming out the other side of these kind of things and seeing what it does for people is really, it's an honor to be in that position.
And the post that I loved so much that you posted the other day, you were talking about integrating Indigenous ancient wisdom into modern times.
Mm.
Maybe you could just speak to that and what the inspiration was behind that post and that share for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we live in an age where we're inundated with information and data,
Mm.
and it feels like the Indigenous voice doesn't really make it to the channels that spew all of this information to us, unless it's being sought out. And there's so much wisdom in these cultures that I think is one of the big problems that we have in modern culture that can really help us and connect us back to the essence of what humanity is really all about. It feels like there's not much space for it. And
Mm.
I feel like we're going through a time now where people are seeking these things out. That voice is starting to become louder and more amplified. It's still early, but it's happening. There's some real beauty in it. The inspiration for that post came from a guy called Malidoma Patrice Soma, an African shaman from Burkina Faso in West Africa. He was from a tribe called the Dagara tribe. His first book speaks to his initiation into the tribe because he was kidnapped when he was 5 years old by Jesuit priests, taken to a Jesuit monastery, and he was kept there until he was 20. And then he escaped. While at the French monastery, he was taught French. They were beaten if they spoke their indigenous language. He forgot his indigenous language, but then the abuse that he suffered there ended up in him attacking the priest and then escaping because he knew he wouldn't be able to stay there after that. And he actually made his way back to his tribe. And it was a big moment for the tribe as to whether he should be allowed back in. Because one of the things that really stuck out for me was the idea that when you learn a new language, it's not just the words you're learning, it's the entire culture that surrounds that language. And what that really made me think of is wherever we're born, and obviously we're born here in the UK, you download a programming, like an operating system that you work from. And there's more that goes into that in terms of where in the UK you grow up and what your family are like as well. But ultimately, people in the UK, there's a core operating system that we operate from. And the tribe felt that the space that was taken up in his psyche by this new language that contains all of the ideas and belief systems of that culture had already taken the place of what should have been the knowledge that he got through initiation. And so there was a lot of talk whether they were going to let him in or not. And they eventually do let him go through initiation. And this first book is the story of his initiation, which is just magical. When we speak about indigenous cultures, we often will talk to the plant medicines and these kind of things, which are incredible. They're really powerful. But this book is not about that. It's about nature, community, and how you're guided to see nature for what it truly is in these beautiful ways. It's the type of book that certain people would read and hear what happens in the initiation because it's truly magical, the things that are experienced. It's if you've ever had a plant medicine journey, then you'd definitely be open-minded to understand what you could experience. But if you've downloaded the Western UK operating system, it doesn't make sense. System, you need to change your operating system so that you can hold the information and know it is true. And it's absolutely beautiful. That book inspired me to dive deeper into his work because it's so powerful. His second book is called The Healing Wisdom of Africa, and it's really a manual that lays out what their culture is built around. Obviously, over here, the narrative that has been perpetuated is that Indigenous people are primitive and behind us in many ways. But when you feel into the way their communities are set up and the holding of each other in that community, it's so incredibly beautiful. And it's a real benchmark for what community could be. It's not necessarily that we have to inherit all of these things, but just to speak to some of the things that they have there. So when a woman's pregnant, a shaman will put her into a trance and will connect to the being that is coming in to the community, into the tribe. And they ask the being, what are you coming here for? And the being will relay what its purpose is. And then once they do that, there's a naming ceremony. They give the child the name that they said is their purpose. So your name is linked to your purpose. So Malidoma Patrice Soma, his name means making friends with the enemy. And then his life played out to that
Wow.
because his grandfather was a shaman in the tribe who's the sort of head medicine man there. And he would always tell him that one day you're gonna fly in these, and he didn't know what planes were, but he was saying you're going to fly in these tubes and you're going to go to the West and you're going to tell people about our culture. His life played out like that because he had learned French and the ways of the West, but then also been initiated to his indigenous tribe. He became this bridge to this African wisdom, and then traveled all over the US and became a huge figure over there of connecting people back to what they're teaching in these indigenous tribes. But just the fact that it's even possible that you can connect to a being before it comes into the world. And then the role of the community is to always remind you of what your purpose is, that you're helped by that community as you grow. And there's all these things that are built in throughout your life where at some point you'll have a mentor, and there's this whole process of seeking out your mentor to help you find your genius, because they fully believe every single has something to offer to the community, has a purpose for being there, has a gift to bring, and it's to the benefit of the community for that to be found in the individual. And so they set up their communities to help nurture that process. Imagine being held like that by a community of people. And it's just phenomenal the way that they structure the community to nurture each individual finding their own genius. A key thing is that there's a big emphasis on healing and connecting, dealing with trauma. And over here in the West, it's seen as a very individual pursuit. You go and see a therapist one-on-one, or it's often a one-to-one thing. Even if you go to ceremonies, there's often not real community built into it. You might turn up at ceremony, have a conversation here and there, have your ayahuasca session or ceremony or whatever it might be, and then you leave and you don't necessarily have strong ties to the people in that group. But from their perspective, community is a fundamental part of the healing process, and it's definitely a missing part of what's happening over here. And it's something that's really resonated with me because I've always felt strongly about community. With the retreats that I do, we try to emphasize the galvanizing of the group so they feel connected to each other throughout the process and afterwards. It's the integration process where you want that community to be held by your community, to help each other along, help each other integrate is really beautiful.
I mean, just to speak to the last thing you said around healing in community, I feel like every conversation I'm having, every podcast episode, it comes up in some kind of way. And I feel like, I hope that we are starting to come to this place of recognizing how important this interrelated community is for our healing. I did an episode with an amazing practitioner called Pat DeVilly a couple of months ago, who was talking about how he sees the stages of healing. The first one being you read some books, you go to a breathwork class, that sort of thing. Then the next thing, you might go and see a therapist, or you might work with a coach. But then always he feels the intention should be to go into that place of group healing, because what is broken or traumatized within relationship or wounded within relationship has to heal within relationship. There's only so much that we can do as individualized beings. That was really coming through in terms of what you were saying around community healing. I love what you were bringing attention to, the way Indigenous wisdom comes through in the most shareable kind of content is in the form of, you go to an ayahuasca ceremony or you go to a shamanic healing. What I have begun to experience more for myself and what you're speaking to is that's only part of it. The medicine ceremonies are one part of a whole massive arena of Indigenous wisdom. I'd love to delve a little more into that because, you know, what do you see? And I know this is a massive question because it's just like, what do you see as Indigenous wisdom?
Yeah, for me, I feel like for the majority of human existence, we have been animistic. I feel like all of the indigenous tribes, if they were going to be put into any kind of category, it would be this idea of animism, understanding that nature is alive, imbued with spirit, and we can commune with it, connect to it, and it can teach us. I think for me, Indigenous wisdom is helping us realize that and connect to that, like elements of that, and understanding it. But in a lot of ways, my own journey has been recognizing the operating system I inherited from the place I grew up, the language I learned, and the cultural ideas implanted into my psyche, and then exposing myself to these different teachings to understand that part as well. Even though I understand it, because of the level of conditioning and programming that I've had, I can't fully connect and speak to a plant in many ways. I don't have access to it as readily as people who haven't had the same operating system. So for me, the stage that I feel like I'm at now is really learning what these things are and what is even possible in this human story, in this human experience. I think the first step is knowing that something is possible, and then it's okay. Maybe now I can start to integrate practices. I'm fairly early on in really building my own practices around these kind of things. And one of the things that they have is the idea of ritual. They have the radical ritual, which is done if somebody's got some sort of deep trauma. It's a ritual designed to move that energy out of the body and replace it with a new energy. You could think of plant medicine ceremonies as forms of radical ritual. But then they have maintenance rituals, which is more around your daily practices and the things that you do around that. And a lot of it is around opening up that communication channel to the ancestors and really speaking to them. It can be as simple as when you wake up, just speaking to the ancestors and telling them what you're doing that day. But it's really building this communication channel with them so that you can invite them in. Because when you do invite them in, they have so much guidance and wisdom to share with you. I think a lot of the wisdom that comes from that place is not even necessarily coming from the individuals that share it. It's coming because they are connected into other worlds and the ancestral realm. It's coming through them as opposed to coming from, which I feel like over here, it's a lot of our work in this space is very heady. It's very mental. It's thinking our way through these things rather than being guided or connecting to something higher and really feeling that.
So whatever you're doing is great. I love that. There was something that I wanted to ask you. Within the post you shared the other day, you mentioned around this deep remembering that actually the more that you have exposed yourself to this Indigenous wisdom over the years, it actually doesn't feel new to you. I loved you saying that because I can definitely resonate with that for myself. You articulating that it felt like a deep remembering. Can you speak to that for yourself?
I shared that because one of the beliefs in the Indigenous culture of the Dagara people is that you don't learn anything. If you become good at an instrument, you're remembering. You already knew. It's such a beautiful reframing of approaching things. Whatever it is that you're called to, you already know it. It's just a process of remembering how to do it. I feel like at some stage of existence, we do know all of these things. Sometimes I'll do exercises, write a message from my higher self to my egoic self. It's really interesting if I can get into a nice flow, the stuff that comes through, because I'm like, wow, that's really profound, but it's almost like it's coming from this other place. And I feel like I really connected to that in the same way that you did with what I shared. I loved that reframing of not necessarily learning, but remembering, because it almost feels like learning, there's effort required and it feels a bit more like an uphill, whereas remembering feels like pulling you towards it. And I think these kind of things like language and the reframing of perspectives are so powerful and important. It's like they say abracadabra, it's like words are spells. And we can, when you start to dissect the idea behind the words or the framing of certain ideas, you can sometimes see the limitation in that. And I feel like with this, what it did for me was speak to more of a liberation in terms of how you approach remembering some of the things that you feel called to. It's what you're supposed to be doing. And so it's listening to that. I think a lot of it is getting out of our own way of the kind of egoic mind and the part of our mind that feels like we have to think our way through life all the time. And then coming back to just hear those little whispers that are inside that are calling us to certain things and following that thread. Because I think there's a lot of beauty there.
Totally. I love that. Another part of what I loved when you wrote in your post about our modern progress over everything. Can you speak a little bit to where you see us at as a society right now with progress over everything?
Yeah, I think for anybody that is somewhat aware and conscious, you can see that the train track that our society is on is not necessarily heading to a great place if we continue doing things the way that we're doing and operating from the place that we're operating. Absolutely rinsing the resources of the planet and animal agriculture to the brink of extinction. It's wild. And it's all because everything's profit driven. We have to always be showing that everything is continually growing. I think that idea and that ideology filters into our own psyches and our own journeys as well. I also feel in some of these spaces, there's been a huge rise in coaching and all these kind of practices. I think they're always done with beautiful intentions and people want to help. I notice it as well, where some people will come to retreat and they'll think that they're coming there because it's about adding these things to who they are and progressing. But we underestimate the amount of healing that we need to do collectively, individually, initially, especially if it's people's first times in these spaces. We have a lot of healing to do. They may be surprised that the intention they have didn't necessarily add these things, but it was about letting go of certain things, because it letting go creates a space for new things to come. I feel like we can feel this pressure to be progress all the time. I'm a movement practitioner as well, and so I practice body weight strength and conditioning, and a lot of it is skill-based stuff where you're working towards a skill that requires a level of strength, of mobility, of cognitive understanding. And I remember I had a conversation with a friend of mine, because my training, there was so many things I hadn't progressed in as much as I thought I'd had. And I was very attached to progress in my physical practice. And he said to me, if you didn't progress at all from now until the day you die, would you still train? I said, yeah, definitely. And it made me really see how attached to progress I was, and that actually progress isn't the ultimate reason that I do this. I do it because it gives me so much more. It's like a moving meditation in many ways for me to train and to practice these skills. Since then, I've become a lot less attached to progress. If progress comes, it's really beautiful and I'm happy with that. But it's not the ultimate and only reason I'm doing things. I guess it's figuring out our why. Collectively, we need to figure out, why are we moving? Why are we doing all these things to progress? Like, what are we actually trying to achieve here collectively? It feels like when progress is the ultimate goal, and it overshadows anything else that might come that is really beautiful about why we're here and what we're doing. It can just lead to real destruction. And I think in the same sort of micro analogy of thinking about it in terms of a physical sense, when I was really attached to progress, there'd be times when I wouldn't be happy. I'd be like frustrated with myself, or I'd like have a slight injury but still train on it because I'm trying to achieve this thing. So there's all these things that I'm harming myself with because I'm attached to this goal of progress. And I guess it's reframing that, because it does feel like it's a real dominant ideology in our culture, is this idea that technology, in terms of technology, it has to progress, and it feels like it's inevitable in many ways that it will progress, especially with the advent of things like AI and these kind of things, that is just like progressing at a rate that we've never even seen before. So it feels we connect back to the idea of Indigenous wisdom and the practices they have there. I feel like the tension is between the incredibly fast pace of technology and then the kind of the polar opposite is this idea of sitting next to a tree and just being with that tree and experiencing that tree for what it truly is. And I feel like we need to do a bit of that before we get on the progress train, because progress is inevitable. It will happen. Even to come back again to the physical analogy, even if the idea of not progressing at all from now to the rest of your life, it is not going to happen. There's always going to be progress, but it's just the attachment to it that I think is the issue.
Yeah, totally. And I think we really don't recognize how deep that progress programming runs. I see it in my life. And my partner and we spent a couple of months in India at the start of the year. And we went surfing. I hadn't surfed in a couple of years, and I was getting really frustrated because I couldn't stay on my board. I kept missing waves. And I used to live in Indonesia, and I got to a point where I felt like quite confident surfing. I was getting really frustrated, and I was in the water after a few days, and I said to a local guy, "Oh, should have carried on surfing," getting like really irritated. And he was like, "Yeah, but it's just about being in the water and having fun, right?" And I was like, "Oh yeah,
Yeah.
of course it is." And there's me just bringing my like westernized programming of I have to be good at the things that I do,
Yeah.
which I guess that we all have like our different variations of how entrenched that is in us as kids.
Hmm.
But I think like just as a society, that is just so deeply entrenched. And I've even seen it within my own like spiritual practice, let's say, like over the 10 years that I've been practicing yoga, meditating, certainly in the beginning few years, I really brought that ideology into my get better at meditating. Or do I have a good morning routine so that I'm becoming a more spiritual person? That type of thing. And I think it
Hmm.
takes quite a lot for us to actually disentangle ourselves
Hmm.
from that individually and collectively too. I don't know if there is anything that within the kind of realm of Indigenous wisdom that speaks to that for you, based on what I've said around our individualized not enoughness or individualized kind of concept of progress.
One of the things that I think really helps, and particularly so with some of the rituals that they discuss in the Dagara, they have lots of rituals that are associated to different elements, so fire, nature, minerals, water, earth, and the different rituals are used for different things. And so a nature ritual is about people connecting and coming back to themselves and understanding and recognizing nature for what it is, and then through that recognizing what they are. And I think when because I think a lot of the time when we get that deep attachment to progress, it comes from this egoic place, this idea
Mm,
of I should be this type of person that can do this thing. It's not coming from the essence of who we are. And I think we can learn a lot from children in this
mm,
area, because when you look at children learning to walk, like just before they can walk, to my son's 2, and he started walking at about 9 or 10 months. And when they're going through that process, they get up, they fall, they stumble, but there's no egoic framework there that gets
mm,
frustrated and like, I should be able to do that by now. They just playfully keep trying and keep getting up, keep exploring, and then eventually we just walk and we don't even think about it. And
mm,
I always share that analogy with people that I work with in a movement capacity, because when you're teaching somebody something new and it's a new skill, people get frustrated, and I experienced that as well, because I came from a very physical background, as always playing pretty high level sport throughout my life, and started doing this kind of training, and I always think to myself I should be able to do this. And it's like that whole idea is
mm,
completely ego. It's like my egoic mind is saying you should be a person that should be able to do this. And when I thought about that analogy, I realized that it's just about playfully exploring and continuing to keep trying these things, and eventually all of these different movements become possible.
mm,
So I think the more we can connect to nature, and through that, and even just saying the words connect to nature, I know for some people, and especially coming from the programming and the operating system that we have in the West, people don't really even know what that actually means. What does that
yeah.
mean, connect to nature? And it's creating, and I guess from their perspective, there are specific rituals that you would do to foster that connection.
Mm,
One of the things that they do, there is a burial, which it's quite an extreme kind of thing. It doesn't necessarily need to be extreme as that. It's burying somebody in the earth and letting them
mm,
that connection to it, and be surrounded by the earth. Other things are as simple as setting up as a community a shrine to the earth, and
mm,
there's all of these different processes that you go through before that, and words that are shared, and then there's beautiful moment of the community really seeing each other. So it's bringing the parts of yourself that you might want to let go and speaking them to the community. And a lot of the things they speak about in the ritual is once that a person has offloaded certain things, a huge important part of it is to be welcomed back into the community. And I guess over here, it's as simple as going and sitting in some cold water, not
mm,
necessarily a bath in your house, but finding some natural water, and just immersing in it, and just listening and just being with it, walking, and not necessarily having your headphones in and listening to music or a podcast, but just tuning into the sounds and being present with it. And I think a lot of it is around just finding presence in nature,
mm.
is the idea of connecting to it.
Yeah. I love that. And just something that you were saying there, you were talking about the practice of when people have been through a ritual and then coming back and being welcomed back
Mm,
into the community and that being a big part of it. And it was reminding me about a conversation. I'm really interested in prison reform. I feel like I must have had many past lives of being an incarcerated person because it's just I'm super interested in it. But I was interviewing Fritzi Horstman a couple of weeks ago, who is the founder of Compassion Prison Project. I don't know if you've come across it at all, but she
mm,
has an amazing video called Step Inside the Circle, which basically draws attention to the levels of trauma that's endemic within the prison system. So invites inmates just to take a step forward if they have experienced fill in the blank. And we were
mm,
talking about how in a lot of Indigenous cultures, if somebody goes against the tribe in some kind of way, commits a crime, there is this inquiry into the breakdown of what's happened collectively.
mhm,
And then they go through a process of being welcomed back into the tribe, and that being a really significant part of healing punishment or healing things that have gone wrong within the tribe. And yeah, it was just really reminding me what you were speaking to there, and actually how far we have come from those practices
mm,
of now even looking at something like the prison system. It's the opposite end of the spectrum of welcoming, trying to bring people back into community and back into connection by actually pushing people and ostracizing people from society. And I just love to segue that into a massive part of this conversation, which is how can we start to really integrate a lot of these practices into our modern times? Yeah, if you could speak to that, in what kind of way you see this as being the most appropriate way, or practices perhaps from the readings that you've done, bringing this into our modern lives for the modern psyche.
mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. But thank you for sharing that about prison. It's a huge thing. We really don't have that. It's the same thing with people that come back from war and these kind of things that
Mm,
get used to go and fight these wars, and then they come back and there's no holding of them for if they come back and they've got PTSD and all these kind of things. It's they're very much on their own in that pursuit. It's not much help, over here in the US. And it's everything. Another aspect of community that they speak to within the Dagara tribe is through the idea of grief.
mm,
And one of the stories that they tell is around the idea of funerals and how when there's a funeral, they the whole village will get together and there's a real outpouring of emotion. And the way they see it is that the tears that are cried help carry the soul to the other
mm,
world. And and there's this idea that the collective shared emotion of grief really
mm,
galvanizes the people together. And when you think about what we do here, the whole stiff upper lip kind of
mm,
idea and this suppressing of emotion of grief in a collective sense. I've been to funerals over here and there are some tears, but in many ways, everyone's trying to hold them back and to not let them out. Whereas they see that there's a complete difference to actually really
mm,
collectively feel and show that and with to each other. And you can see how that energy can really bring people together when it's shared like that. So yeah, to answer your question, I think there are lots of things that are happening over here now that I think are starting to speak to these ideas and the wisdom that comes through from these places. There's more and more men's and women's groups that are
mm,
around, are offering community and places to be held. So it's that those kind of things are definitely a beautiful start. I think more people are being called to different practices. I heard, do you know the Tara Swart, the neuroscientist?
no.
She's a neuroscientist, and she was on Diary of a CEO, and
Okay.
she was speaking to having these somatic therapy
Mm,
practices that's really much about working with the body
mm,
and I do see we've seen breath work really rise over the last few
mm,
years and become something that many people have tried and are experiencing. And you rewind a few years and no one was really doing breath work. It was a
Yeah.
really like fringe type of thing, but that's really taken a surge. And I think the next wave of healing practices will be about how trauma lives in the body and how we can move it
Mm.
through the body. So lots of somatic therapies, these kind of things. I can see that really becoming legitimized more and more, like breath work has been. So I feel like we are slowly remembering. There's people that
Mm.
are being called to study these practices, and people are building communities that speak to these really simple yet powerful things. So I feel like the process is in motion. And
Yeah.
I'm an optimist. I feel like we're gonna be all right, humanity. We're gonna get through this. And we are at this stage of remembering, and it's gonna increase as time goes on. So I speak to this. I met a guy recently who'd had some real trouble during COVID
Mm.
and got because his work completely stopped and fell into severe depression and didn't have a network that had access to any kind of alternative methods
Mm.
for working through depression. So went through the traditional chat channels, called up the doctor, said, take these. So he got put on these antidepressants, which he shared made him worse, like a lot worse, and to the
Mm.
point he became suicidal. And it was
Mm.
only through bumping into a friend who saw how rough he seemed, who took him in and then exposed him to some different practices,
Wow.
some of them involving things like plant medicine that really brought
Mm.
him back. And so you can see, so people like that, I feel like that story really highlights how the framework that we have currently that is supposed to be there to hold us and to help us in times of need isn't really serving us. And so more and more people are seeking out these alternative ways to heal and to get well. And that is only happening more and more that I
Mm.
see. And the narrative around these things are shifting so many, even myself and my own personal journey. Like if I was to rewind, or if a much earlier version of me would see the person I am now, they'd be like, who is this guy until all of this woo stuff? But gradually, the woo stuff is that the idea of calling it that comes from
Yeah.
the operating system that we've inherited. And the more you learn about these kind of things, and you see how deeply connected we are to nature, and
Mm.
you then open up the channels to be able to receive from it. And
Mm.
so I feel like here we just need to continue having conversations and sharing who we are with people, because
Mm.
I feel like every person has a beautiful story that can inspire other people and
Mm.
inspire people to connect to that part of themselves that they may not have been listening to. And it takes the collective to really make the change. I used to be very much lone wolf, thought I had to figure everything out on my own. And over the years, I've just seen how beautiful it is to lean on the community and to allow
Mm.
myself to be held by the people around me and to help
Mm.
me through times of difficulty. And we need to use our voice to share our truths. And in doing that, people will hear and they'll start to find their own truths and then connect to the parts of themselves that they need to connect to move on. And
Mm.
so I think the the remembering that is required is inevitable and
Mm.
it will happen and it is happening. And these kind of teachings, this kind of wisdom is only going to permeate more and more minds as time goes on. So I feel
Mm.
like, yeah, we just have to continue as we are and let go and surrender and trust.
Mm.
And there's some words that I share around the power of surrender and trust. And if we can connect to those, that we are then able to receive. There's a poem
Mm.
I wrote actually about those, and the first step being to surrender, which is to accept that we're no longer in the driving seat, and we relinquish the burden of control and feeling like we
Mm.
have to control every aspect of everything, and then to trust and to trust with love,
Mm.
and connect to the idea that trust is this inevitability, and it's the same inevitability of the butterfly becoming caterpillar or the acorn becoming an oak, and that same that we're on exactly the right path that we're supposed to be on. And then if we're able to really connect to those two elements, then that what's left is to receive. So it's surrender, trust, receive is the mantra that I share. And it's a powerful thing that's helped me a lot in ceremony and in life to remember that. And I feel like with this and the idea of hoping and trusting that this wisdom will permeate and will get to more and more people, it helps me along with that as well.
Mm. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I just wanted to ask you a question because it's something that I think about myself with how much these teachings are needed and welcomed within our society, within our modern times. Where do you feel like, or how do you feel like we can draw that line, that balance between utilizing and benefiting from Indigenous practices, rituals, initiations, ceremonies, whatever it is, whilst avoiding this kind of appropriation? So, how do you feel like we should be approaching receiving this wisdom whilst also
And
holding its sacredness, if that makes sense?
yeah, it makes total sense. The reason for an initiation
Mm,
is to prepare the boy or the girl, whoever it may be, for a life within that culture and that framework. So it doesn't make sense to copy and paste
mm,
the initiations from these other cultures because we don't live in the same way or in the same culture as them. We need initiations here that prepare us for life here.
mm,
And I've shared before about there's a pretty savage initiation by a tribe. They're in Northern America, and they would they would put these hooks through a young boy when he was ready to join the tribe, and then hoist them up into the air
wow.
to the point that they're on the brink of passing out, and then they eventually let them down, and then
Yeah.
the village would gather in a circle, and they would run around. Oh, so once they let down, they offer their little finger, and then they chop the little finger off, and then the village would gather around in a circle, and then they run around the circle, and then the village try to grab the ropes that are attached to the hooks to pull them out. And it sounds completely barbaric, and I don't think anyone would sign up their teenager for that over here. But the reality of their situation is that,
Mm,
they were existing in a tribe in a place where there were many other tribes who might come through and want to kill everybody and kill your
mm,
family. So you had to be a warrior and you had to
mm,
show that you have what it takes to be a man in that culture and in that world. And when you would ask the boys, they would say it was the most beautiful day of their lives to be
mm,
recognized in that way, that they are capable of being that for the people that they love. And yeah, it sounds barbaric, but that's the world that they existed and lived in. And we don't necessarily need something as extreme as that
mm.
to prepare boys over here, but we need something. There's something missing. And there are people that are doing some really beautiful work in the men's workspace. I know Michael Maisley does some stuff with teenagers around initiation and these kind of things. So it just takes some thought to think
Yeah.
about what do we need to do to prepare our young people for life in
Mm,
this part of the world. And in that also lends itself to these other practices. So for me, what I feel like I'd like to spend some time doing over the future is to really revisit and absorb the rituals and the practices that are within the books by this guy and think about how we could reframe them and apply them to,
mm,
because ultimately I feel like we're always creating bridges. People create bridges for other people to walk across to, and if a practice is, and I felt that a lot because I do some work with corporate people and corporate
mm,
companies, and then other work I do is with people who are more from the plant medicine world and connected to that. And the way that you talk about certain things, you have to change the terminology and well, the
mm.
message stays the same, but the words around it so
The
that you can
deliverance.
resonate with people.
Yeah.
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 So that you don't alienate people and make
Mm,
people think that's not for me. And
mm,
so I think there's lots of different ways. And so it depends on the audience. Some of the events that I do attempts to do these kind of things where it might be a walk in nature where we don't talk for half an hour of it and we just listen. And it's kind of simple
mm,
things like that. And a lot of people may have never done that before.
mm,
Or we go and we sit and we just sit by a tree and we'll just listen and just feel and just allow ourselves to be in its presence. And I think it's about setting up containers where we can just start to access these things in simple ways. I don't necessarily think that we need to jump straight into a full Daguerre tribe burial with everybody, because yes, some people might be interested in that, but it's going to alienate lots of other people. So I think it's a slower process of introducing people to these practices and I think that's going to come from the people who are called to do that kind of work, and then their ability to become that bridge. So it's not it's something that people that they're speaking to can resonate with and don't feel put off by, and feel like, actually, yeah, I'm interested in, I'm open to exploring that and connecting to it.
I just have a couple of last questions. You've spoken a little bit to how this Indigenous wisdom has impacted you personally and your work. But I'd love to ask you as well how you feel like it has impacted the way that you parent your children.
Really interesting. I've definitely felt really called to expose them to events and gatherings that I want to be cemented, because they're at this beautiful stage now of they're both within the first 7 years where our subconscious programming is being developed. They're in full download mode. And so what's been really important to me is to expose them as much as I can to beautiful events, whether it's music from the Hinny Quinn or a gathering where we're dancing and everybody's just got really beautiful energy, because I know that stuff is going into their subconscious, and they might not remember it or be able to recall it, because there's a difference between recall and remember, right? So they might not be able to recall it in later lives, but it'll be remembered somewhere in the psyche and in the tissue. We spend lots of time out in nature. I love the big thing that spoke to me about how I feel about parenting is this continually, because we are their close community, being their parents, right? And recognizing that they have a genius and they have a purpose to be here, and wanting to really hold space for that. I know in Indigenous cultures, they do speak to the idea that the parents are not necessarily the best people for that throughout life, especially once we get to certain ages when we start to reject what our parents are saying. We look for other influences. And so I'm already thinking about seeking out places when the time is right for them to have their initiatory experiences, because I know that as much as I want to do it, it's better if it comes from another elder who they respect and they resonate with. So that will happen for them at some point. Other than that, it's a lot of conversation about nature, about what it is, the more mystical side of reality. We talk about, God, and with my daughter, my son is still in caveman stage with his communication, but my daughter can hold conversation really well. And we talk about where she was before she came here and these kind of things. And we'll have these deep conversations about that. And so it's a kind of slow drip feeding of everything that I learn, I want to convey to them and to her. And so I do find it interesting when we do get into these deeper conversations in, okay, how do I make this concept understandable to a 6-year-old mind? And it really impresses me with how much she can understand and how much she already knows. And because I guess what I want to try and do as a parent is not make that remembering process as difficult as it might have been for me, and so that it's always a bit closer, these kind of things. And I think in knowing that as a parent I can't hold her through that process for her whole life, because there will be times when it's understanding that I have to build this community around me of people who I can bring into her life, who are older, who she respects, who can then do that sort of thing for her as well. Because that saying, it takes a village to raise a child, right? It's completely true. And yeah, a big thing for me, and it's sometimes a source of a little bit of stress, is because I feel like I've got lots of beautiful people around me, but the actual community that I live in, there's a lot of people that don't necessarily live with the same values, but this is the place where I live, and this is the actual people who are around are those types of people. So I do sometimes see this tension between that might arise in the future when she does start to look to her peer group more for influence than us as parents, where there'll be this tension between what these people are saying are cool and what her parents are saying. And so eventually I would love to be able to be in a position where we are in community and lots of the people around are of a similar kind of coming from a similar place in terms of the values, in terms of
Mm.
exposure to smartphones and technology and the foods that are eaten. And because I think that really helps, because it's one thing to see some people occasionally, but it's a completely different thing to actually be living in and amongst people who are resonating like that. But at the moment, I'm really happy with the person that she's becoming and he's becoming, and she blows me away with what she's already got in terms of wisdom and understanding of nature and connection. And yeah, she's an incredible little human being, and I feel like she's going to be okay. She's super confident, and she's definitely someone who I feel like she's going to do all right. She's got a bit about her. She's switched on.
I
Mm.
love that. I heard a while ago someone said something to me that true mastery is when you can explain something to a child. So
Yeah.
there you go. You got your benchmark there for you.
Yeah, that's it. She asks all the questions. It's usually just before she's supposed to go to sleep that she'll ask the
Oh.
deepest questions. And because she knows it's like, oh, I'm like, this will be a really interesting thing to get into. But actually, though, you do need to go to bed.
Yeah, sounds like a great trick there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much, Alex. Is there anything else that you want to share on this topic or also about the work that you do?
Yeah, if anybody wants to check out the work, we have a page on Instagram called Return to Nature, and we do lots of different events. The whole intention behind the events and what we do is to return to nature, to connect to nature, to connect to the nature within ourselves. And yeah, retreats and events that span lots of different practices, from working with plant medicines to sweat lodges to ecstatic dances, breath work, sound, all these type of things. Got a really beautiful community of people have gathered around it and very active in terms of going to beautiful events together. Just yeah, it's been an absolute honor and privilege to see develop and see it unfold. Aside from that, there's some really interesting things. So I recently started a contract with Vivo Barefoot to build community with them and to grow and curate around a space that they're opening up. So in early 2025, there's going to be some really beautiful things happening there, and some lovely collaborations with men's work practitioners, women's work practitioners, breath work, sound, all of the things that they're really supportive of that. And I see them as a really beautiful bridge for people because they've got great reach, and they're really open to connecting people to a wide array of experiences, which is going to be really powerful to bring it in the new year. If people want to connect with me, I'm on Instagram as Sesto Flow. Yeah, that's about it, I think. Unless do you want me to share my poem about
I would
surrender?
love that. Yes, I
Yeah.
would. You?
Okay. So it's around the mantra surrender, trust, receive. And those three words came to me in ceremony, and they were a beautiful anchor for me. And then during a time, I was doing a 6-month study with a guy called Miski Taiki, who is a shamanic practitioner based in Peru. And during that study, I got lots of creative inspiration to start writing, and I wrote this poem. So the first step is to surrender, but that's why you're here. Relax grip on the reins. There's no need to steer, for you are guided and held by your ancestors past, a powerful being whose lineage is vast. Can you step into the fire, knowing you can't be burnt? The freedom on the other side of fear must be earned. So let love be the wave that carries body and mind to the shores of surrender, a safe place to unwind. Relieved to be home, we're no longer at sea, safe, open, ready to receive. The portal to the palace of abundance opens wide. The reward for your courage is to now step inside and receive all with humility. There's no space for greed. For you don't get what you want, you get what you need. guidance, clarity, ideas, resolution, peace, joy, healing, connection, infinite evolution, every single day, endless transformation, eskawata kayawe. Too good to be true, too hard to believe. Repeat the mantra, surrender, trust, receive.
Amazing. Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. What a gift. What a gift for me on a Monday afternoon.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, that's really stunning. Super powerful.
Thank you. I'll send you the words if you want to
Yeah.
them again. But it's helped me a lot, and I often in ceremony, because I've said it so many times, I know it now, and I'll repeat it back to myself, and it helps me a lot.
Yeah. Wow. God, you get some powerful, profound downloads in ceremony. I haven't come up with anything that beautiful.
I know I didn't come up with it in ceremony, but it did come. I did write it really quickly, and I was like, oh wow, this is actually all right.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. No, I love that. I'm definitely going to listen to that again. Thank you so much. It was beautiful. Thank you
Thank you.
so much for this conversation. Really inspiring. And yeah, just massive respect for the work that you're doing. Just really a pleasure to connect with you. So thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the conversation and the beautiful questions.
Thank you for listening. It's great to have you with me on this journey towards higher love for all. Our time is our greatest commodity and gift, so thanks for investing it in yourself and sharing it with me. Please do take a moment to rate and review the show, all which enables more people to find me and for me to connect with more great guests each week for both yours and my enjoyment. All links, references and contact information detailed too within the show notes. And I always love to hear your feedback, so feel free to hit me up on my Instagram at higherlove_with_Megan or via my website higher-love.com. Send your takeaways, and if you enjoyed, please share or send on to else who would. Until next, big love.